My maternal grandmother grew up in Aleppo, Syria. Her name was Olga. I don't know why, but Silvera, that was her maiden name. And she moved from Syria to Egypt and then to Manchester. She had married an Egyptian man, and it was late 1933. They had a toddler, and she was pregnant with my mother. I know the last name of my grandfather, Shweka, but I never found out his first name, not only because I never met him, but because there, in 1933, she decided to divorce him. He was supposedly, just because I don't know, I never heard it from my grandmother herself directly, but he was playing around with other women, and in general, he was a no-good-nick. That's how the stories come down to me. So there she is. It's 1933. She decides to divorce him and become a single mother and move to Haiti. Wow. I didn't think you would see that coming. She had an aunt that lived there, and believe it or not, there were a handful of Syrian Jews that lived there. And in Haiti, I think within the year, she met the only eligible Jewish bachelor and decided to marry him. His name was Leon. He adopted my mother and her older sister, and they had 3 more children. And eventually, they moved to Bogota, Colombia. You could tell I don't quite speak Spanish, because there were no Jewish men for my mother and her older sister to marry. So Olga, my grandmother, is the person I thought about while watching the film A Real Pain this past Sunday night. The movie's directed by, I see some of you have seen it, Jesse Eisenberg, and also Jesse Eisenberg stars in it, along with Kieran Culkin. So the two, Eisenberg and Culkin, play really close cousins in their 30s, but Jesse Eisenberg, whose name in the movie is David, plays a hardworking family man who's a little confused by his cousin, Benji, and Benji's kind of a charismatic, no-good-nick. But he's also wonderful. You should see the film. So they go on a Holocaust tour of Poland because they want to learn about their grandmother. And they also visit their grandmother's home in Poland. She was a survivor of Majdanek, a Nazi death camp she escaped from during World War II. And here's the moment that made me think of my own grandmother. David, played by Eisenberg, tells his fellow tourists over dinner one night about his grandmother. And he says, quote, "She used to tell me that, first-generation immigrants work some menial jobs. They drive cabs, they deliver food. Second generation, they go to good schools, and they become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And the third generation lives in their mother's basement and smokes pot all day." I promise you it's still worth seeing the movie. So Benji hears this, and he goes, "What do you mean? I live in my mother's basement." Wounded, he gets up and stomps off. And once he leaves, David says, "How can the product of 1,000 miracles turn out like him?" I know. That line stuck with me. My grandmother's family was kicked out of Spain in the 15th century when the Jews were expelled and eventually found their way to Syria. They made a home there until the early 20th century when it became too hard to survive there financially. And so after Cairo and Manchester, Olga, a product of so many miracles over so many generations, found the strength somehow to pick herself up, pregnant and dragging a toddler to move to Haiti. Yes, I'm repeating myself because I can't believe this story myself. I stand here in wonder at her strength. She, the product of 1,000 miracles, defied all odds to create a new life for herself. Despite her shattered dreams, she somehow survived and created a big, flourishing family. Her courage and resourcefulness created yet another miracle, and that miracle made me possible. And this finally, and you may be wondering, brings us to the portion of the week. Mishpatim. So here we are, after 1,000 miracles in the Torah, the creation of the world, Noah and his family surviving a flood, Abraham and Sarah going on the impossible journey, leaving everything they knew, Sarah having a baby at age 90, fulfilling God's impossible promise, and Abraham becoming a father at 100 when Isaac is born. Then Isaac survives after almost being slaughtered by his father. Jacob wrestles with an angel. Joseph survives being thrown into a pit and almost murdered by his brothers. And somehow this crazy Israelite family survives to go down into Egypt and become slaves. But then they're liberated by God's strong arm and mighty hand. They walk through a split sea and enter the freedom of the wilderness, receiving gifts of sweet water and manna from the heavens. And stand at Sinai, last week's Parsha, and hear God's voice, only to come to this moment, our Parsha, Mishpatim, where suddenly all the miracles stop, where in fact the story itself stops. Instead, what we hear is law after law. Here's an example in Exodus 23. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back. And when you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless help raise it. Ki ter'echa morson echa rovetz tachat masa'o v'chaldalta me'azov lo azov ta'azov imo. Story gives way to law. Suddenly, instead of hearing about the 10 plagues and thunder and lightning and voices at Mount Sinai, we're hearing about ox and donkeys and asses and pits. And I think it's because there's an amazing shift in the kind of literature it is. Suddenly it's when this happens, you should do this. Suddenly, the story is not about somebody else. It's about the person being addressed in the Torah, reading the Torah or listening to the Torah. When this happens to you, you should. So from someone else's story, a mythic story about our ancestors, about freedom, about suffering, about plagues, suddenly it's about the nitty-gritty of our lives and living that story. So for instance, to translate from oxes and donkeys to our own life to situations in our world. You're on the number 1 train. You look up from your phone. You see there's a person there struggling with their burdens. Maybe they're homeless, maybe they're not, maybe they're elderly, maybe they're not. You stand up and you give them your seat. There's a direct line from Mishpatim to that act. Or maybe you're waiting for the elevator in your building, and you see a neighbor you don't really like so much. They don't acknowledge you so much. Somehow, you just don't really feel like going out of your way for them. But they're coming home from vacation, and they've got all these suitcases, right? They've got a burden, and you hold the door open for them, and you ride in the elevator with them and exchange pleasantries, because that's the thing to do. This ancient document actually translates. It's guiding each of us in our situations now, today, or tomorrow. It could be the number 1 train or the M104, or when you're angry at someone at work. In each of these situations, you can raise up that beast, the intractable beast of life, and lift it closer to holiness by your actions, by our collective actions. The passage continues and really gets to the heart of it, saying, "You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of a stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. Ger lo tilchatz, v'atem yidatem et nefesh hager, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim." So here we are, the product of endless miracles. What will we do now with our lives? What will we do now when so many are imperiled at this very moment? This passage tells us why we are here. It's not to build up our resumes. It's not to amass power. It's not for that second vacation home. The Torah makes the charge and the purpose of ongoing Jewish existence clear. It's to care for the vulnerable, the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. This is the charge. This is the reason for the endless miracles. To know deep in our bones that this is our story and we are creating it one kind act at a time. I will tell you now that the full name of my grandmother, of the man my grandmother married in Haiti, the one eligible Jewish bachelor, was Leon Bibas. The man who adopted my mother and her sister Olga's children from her first marriage shared the same last name as the Israeli hostage family in this week's news. I don't know if I have any distant relation to those Bibases, but after October 7th, when I saw the heartbreaking photos of Shiri and her 9-month-old Kfir and 4-year-old Ariel, that family had special resonance for me, and I cried for them in particular. And I cried again when Yarden Bibas, the father of Kfir and Ariel, was released on February 1st, and I could not fathom what he was facing, knowing, or soon to know, that he lost his entire family. And now, too, when the bodies of Kfir and Ariel have been returned, and purportedly the body of Shiri was returned as well, but it wasn't her. Cruelly, unthinkably, the wrong body was returned. The nation of Israel and the people of Israel are reeling from this tragedy. We stand here from afar and weep with them. We are the people of thousands of miracles, surviving the expulsion from Spain, the decimation in Europe, rising up again and again from so many tragedies because of so many miracles. But those miracles did not save that family, did not save that innocent, beautiful family, did not save so many victims who died on October 7th and since, who are victims of this ongoing, pray there should be peace, savage war. So somehow we, the products of so many miracles, need to rise up again with fierce determination and resilience and know our mission to continue on as a people to survive, and at the same time, to care for the vulnerable with kindness and right action, to somehow find the courage to continue facing the terrible and terrifying challenges of our times in Israel and here on our soil. And still, even those with those threats, to care for the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. What acts of kindness can we, products of 1,000 miracles, extend to one another and to the strangers in our midst to make those miracles mean something now, even as we ourselves are so threatened? And I dare ask further, what miracles might we make possible in our times? Please, God, may we live with sufficient courage and kindness in these impossible times to merit the miracles wrought for our ancestors, the miracles that made our lives possible.